Being a landlord, it's never really a neutral act, is it?
Not at all.
You're sitting right at this critical intersection of shelter, which is, a fundamental human need, and commerce, a financial calculation.
And that tension is being played out perfectly right now in two really divergent rental markets, England and Jamaica.
They're taking completely different paths.
Totally different, creating this massive divergence in risk and reward for investors.
Absolutely. So today's mission is a deep dive into an analysis comparing these legislative and financial landscapes. And the real question the source pushes us to ask isn't, which one's better.
No, that's too simple.
It's better for whom and under what specific conditions.
And what's fascinating is that they're operating on fundamentally opposite philosophies. England is moving fast toward prioritizing what they call security of tenure.
Making it harder for landlords to get their property back.
Much harder.
Yeah.
Slower, more procedural.
Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Jamaica is sticking with a system built on affordability control.
Yeah, it's governed by this decades-old act that tries to fix rent levels. It comes from a post-war need to stop exploitation.
So for you, the learner, these different approaches create entirely different sets of calculations. You have to decide if you prefer the sort of cold logic of formal compliance in England or the more adaptive reality of an informal market in Jamaica.
One with currency risk and pretty inconsistent enforcement.
Okay, let's unpack this. We'll start with England, which the source material calls regulation as reset.
A good way to put it.
For generations, the UK rental market was all about short-term certainty for the landlord, but this constant long-term anxiety for the tenant.
Right, because of the infamous Section 21 no-fault eviction provision.
That was the system's blunt instrument.
A very blunt instrument.
Yeah.
Legally, it was sound, but our analysis notes it was deeply corrosive. It let landlords remove tenants with very little notice, sometimes just to hike the rent for the next person.
So then this 2026 Renters' Rights Act comes along, and it's that philosophical reset we talked about.
It's a complete game changer for the UK property model.
A key change is the abolition of fixed-term tenancies. So everything moves to these rolling or periodic agreements.
And most importantly, the removal of that no-fault eviction route.
Section 21 is gone.
It's gone. The act also brings in stricter rules on rent increases, cracking down on those bidding wars we saw in London and Manchester. And it promises a decent home standard for the private sector.
So property ownership is no longer about an easy exit. It's about rigorous, ongoing compliance.
Exact.
But wait a minute. If big institutional landlords like predictability, aren't these stricter rules just swapping one kind of anxiety for another? Like, tenants don't fear eviction, but now maybe supply shrinks because small landlords get forced out and rents go up anyway.
That's a crucial question. And the analysis suggests the risk shifts. It doesn't just disappear. The new environment absolutely rewarded what you could call process literacy.
Process literacy.
The small, accidental landlord who just relied on a quick Section 21 notice, that person is now obsolete.
So what does that look like in practice? Process literacy. It means you can't be informal anymore. The landlord has to understand the 8 specific legitimate grounds for seeking possession, and all of them are mandatory routes through a tribunal.
Things like wanting to sell the property or move a family member in.
Or repeated, and this is key documented breaches of the tenancy. Every single step requires meticulous paperwork.
I see. So there's the trade-off. You lose the speed and flexibility of a quick eviction.
But the rules for those who stay are transparent. They're slow, which definitely increases costs if a tenant stops paying. But the outcome, if you follow the process perfectly, is predictable.
And that predictability is why the big players can still make it work.
That's exactly why the market is still scalable for them. The margins might be shrinking, sure, but the clear rule set makes it viable for professional operators. The UK is basically saying, we only want serious high-compliance landlords now.
Okay, let's do a hard pivot and contrast that with Jamaica. If England is a reset, Jamaica is protection frozen in time. The Rent Restriction Act there has been around since the 1940s.
Born in an era of scarcity, designed to stop exploitation.
And in theory, the act is incredibly comprehensive. It fixes standard rents based on assessed property values, not market value.
The market values, that's a huge distinction.
Huge. It restricts rent increases unless you get formal approval from a rent assessment board. And it even criminalizes overcharging.
Wow, that sounds like some serious tenant protection. But this is where the reality on the ground gets messy, right? The source says the act applies very unevenly.
That's the key failure. The law just hasn't evolved. So all these modern Jamaican rentals, the new builds, luxury spots, gated communities, they often sit completely outside the Act's effective reach.
How? Are there loopholes?
There are specific exemption thresholds, usually based on the property's value or when it was built.
Hmm.
So high-end or new properties can generally charge whatever the market will bear.
And if you own an older property, one that falls inside that category, you're basically stuck.
You're immobilized. Precisely. If you own an older building in, say, Kingston or Montego Bay, you are locked into these controlled rents that have no connection to today's reality.
So your capital values might be rising, but your income is just flat.
Flat. While your maintenance costs, driven by inflation and the climate, are climbing, there's no mechanism to keep up.
So for that landlord, it's financially punishing. Why does a law like that just stay on the books?
Because for the people who live in those units, low-income families, multi-generational households, that act is still a lifeline.
It's what keeps them from being displaced.
Exactly. It's what maintains community stability. The tragic irony is that the law, designed to protect affordable housing, is now helping to destroy it because landlords just can't afford to maintain the buildings on those rents. It's protection frozen in time.
Okay, let's pivot to Section 3 and translate this into hard investor risk. The source calls it the risk swap. This feels like the core strategic choice for anyone listening.
It is. The structure of the market defines your risk. In England, the landlord keeps their pricing power. They can set market rents.
But they lose their exit power.
Completely. Getting a tenant out, even for a good reason, is now a long, procedural, and expensive fight.
And in Jamaica, it's the complete opposite.
The flip side. The landlord keeps their exit rights in theory, but they lose their pricing power if they're caught under the Rent Restriction Act. Your income is capped, no matter what your costs are doing.
So this creates two totally distinct risk profiles for an investor.
Right. In England, your income risk is lower, but your possession risk goes through the roof. Your capital is tied up in a building you might struggle to ever get back.
And in Jamaica?
Possession risk is often less of a problem, but your income risk increases dramatically.
So the question for you, the investor, is, are you better equipped to handle a slow, procedural eviction or rapid income stagnation?
That's the decision.
So let's talk hard financials. We all know that, on paper, a landlord in London collects way more gross rent than one in Kingston, but the analysis keeps hammering this point home. Gross rent is not net income.
It's an essential distinction, especially in England, which adds layers of cost. The big one is the Section 24 rule, which phases out the ability for individual landlords to deduct their full mortgage interest costs from their rental income before tax.
So high leverage, high debt strategies get penalized.
Exactly. Unless you set up a limited company, which has its own costs and complexities. Then you've got higher buying costs, all sorts of local council licenses, mandatory checks.
And then costs of a tenant not paying while you go through that new, slower eviction process.
Right. So you get high gross income, but your net margins are predictable and shrinking.
Jamaica, on the other hand, often has lower entry costs and way fewer formal compliance hurdles, so less bureaucracy.
But where do those savings go?
They get eaten up by operational risks. Your maintenance exposure is much higher because of the climate. You're dealing with hurricanes, mold, water damage.
Not abstract risks. Not at all. And you've got currency risk. You collect rent in Jamaican dollars,
Right.
but your imported materials for repairs are priced in U.S. dollars. If the local currency slips, your costs can just spike overnight against a fixed income.
But the analysis has this one key financial insight that's actually kind of surprising.
It is. It says that a modest Jamaican rental, if you buy it outright with cash, zero debt, and you manage it really well, can, in percentage terms, give you a net yield that rivals a heavily leveraged UK property.
So it's not the geography, it's the structure.
It's all about the structure. Your debt levels, your tax situation, your management strategy, that's what decides your profit, not just the address.
So you're deciding which government you trust more, the one that will raise your compliance costs or the one that will artificially cap your income.
That's a great way to put it.
Let's move to Section 4 and the human factor. I mean, we're not just talking about assets on a ledger. These are homes.
And climate absolutely dictates everything in a way people often forget. In Jamaica, it's the heat, the constant moisture, the threat of hurricanes that shapes construction, materials, the whole maintenance cycle.
You have to budget for weather.
Constantly. And in England, it's the cold. It's all about insulation, damp prevention, boiler maintenance, and now all this new regulation around energy efficiency. They're two opposing climate regimes.
And they face one shared pressure point: the so-called escape hatch of short-term rentals, like Airbnb.
Yeah, and that hatch is closing.
The source material is clear that this market is tightening everywhere. In England, you've got community backlash and new licensing rules. In Jamaica, you've got oversupply and just being totally dependent on the platform,
The idea that you can just sidestep long-term regulations by switching to short-term lets, that illusion is fading.
which forces us back to the core truth.
That geography alone doesn't create value. Management creates value. It's the operator's skill in navigating these different rules, climates, and cultures.
And there's a powerful quote in the source from Dean Jones, the founder of Jamaica Realms, that just it captures the gravity of all this. He says, property teaches you patience because it refuses to be rushed. It teaches you humility because the building always wins. And it teaches you responsibility because shelter is never just an asset. It is someone's life happening indoors.
That really is the ultimate synthesis, isn't it? It connects the balance sheet to the moral reality of what you're doing.
So if we synthesize everything, we have two very clear investor profiles emerging from this.
We do. England suits the institutional, compliance-driven investor looking for predictable income. If you want high pricing power and clear, if slow, legal routes, and you're prepared to win the battle of possession through paperwork, England's your market.
And Jamaica.
That suits cash buyers. Long-hold investors who are okay with higher operational risk and have deep local knowledge to navigate those. Uneven laws. An intentional Jamaican landlord is focused on climate resilience and proactive cost management.
So the bottom line, the final implication across both places, is that the era of the accidental landlord is over.
It's ending, globally.
You can't just stumble into owning a property anymore and rely on easy evictions or old, outdated rules.
It's being replaced by intentional ownership, an owner who is fully aware of the law, the climate, the culture, and the consequences of providing shelter.
Which leaves us with this final thought for you to think about. Since a landlord's primary risk in England is now possession, and in Jamaica it's income stagnation, how does the type of regulation ultimately shape whether an owner sees their property as a short-term leverage play to extract cash quickly, or as a long-term community stewardship asset meant to appreciate through careful maintenance?